The study of compounds that contain bonds between carbon atoms is called organic chemistry. You've probably heard people talk about organic chemistry before. Now you know what they're referring to. Remember when we talked about organic compounds, it's anything that contains carbon. So if you see a big C in the chemical formula, then you know that it is an organic compound. A macromolecule is a large molecule. There are four main groups of biological macromolecules, which we call biomolecules. Macro means big, molecule is a molecule. So that's how you're going to remember what we're talking about here. Macromolecules are made by linking smaller molecules that are called monomers to form polymers. Okay, it's the same thing. You're going to find that if you can recognize certain root words and prefixes in biology, things are a lot easier. So let's look at these two words, monomers and polymers. If you look at the first section, the prefix there, mono means one. Okay, mono is one, and poly means many. So each time you see mono, it's talking about one. If you see poly, they're talking about many. So that's going to help you here. When we were talking about the macromolecules, the single piece of it, almost like a Lego, is going to be a monomer. You put all those together to form a polymer. Monomers are joined together through a chemical process called dehydration synthesis. Okay, dehydration synthesis is when we're going to take those monomers and we're going to put them all together and form those polymers. But we can also break those polymers down. And when we break those polymers down, they're going to go through something called hydrolysis. And we're going to talk about that a lot more in future units. You just need to know that dehydration synthesis, your keyword is synthesis, to synthesize means to build, to create. Okay, so that's when we're putting the monomers together. To break down is hydrolysis. Lysis on the end of that, hydrolysis, means to break down. Okay, to lyse means to break apart. So once again, there's some key words that if you can start picking up on, it's going to help make the big picture come together in your mind. Okay, I want you to take a second and draw this chart in your notes. You can start a new page and put it on a whole other page of its own if you want. You can try to squeeze it in on the bottom of the page that you're working on now. Whatever you choose to do in your notes, I want to see this chart though. You'll refer back to this chart quite often, so make sure that you've got it all filled in. I'm going to let you pause the video now and then come back to it when you've filled it all in. Okay, so in this chart you see our columns are macromolecule, monomer, monomer structure, elements, and examples. Okay, so here in the first column, these are the four main biomolecules that were mentioned at the beginning of the notes. The biological macromolecules are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay. For each of those, next to it in the next column is the monomer. That's the Lego that we use to put all together to create that macromolecule. So carbohydrates are made of lots of monosaccharides. Okay, saccharin, you may have heard before, is a sugar. And so that should kind of help you remember when you see that saccharide right here, think of saccharin. Okay, monosaccharide is for carbohydrates. The structure in the next column is showing you what the bonds look like, what's fit next to each other in those structures. The elements contained in carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And some examples are going to all be your sugars. You can have glucose, starch, cellulose. You can have simple carbohydrates or complex carbohydrates. Then the next macromolecule are lipids. These are your fats. Okay, so there's On the monomer side, you can have triglycerides or fatty acids. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen as well, but you'll see the monomer structure is quite different than the carbohydrates are. Okay, so make sure that you recognize these. You're probably going to be asked on a test to identify using this structure, so you need to make sure that you're drawing these, often practicing them, quizzing yourself on them if you can recognize, because deciding between carbohydrate and lipid is probably the most difficult because they each contain the same elements. They each contain only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, as I was saying, the lipids are your fats, oils, waxes. You find these in the cell membrane, in hormones, and long-term energy storage. We all use lipids there in our cells. Proteins are made of monomers called amino acids. The proteins are where we find nitrogen now. So where the first two only had carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, now we're including nitrogen. And you'll see the N right here. There's our nitrogen. Okay, so once again, these two are a little bit more difficult to see because they're both carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, if you see carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, then that tells you that it's a protein. Some examples are going to be enzymes, your hair, your bone, your muscles, antibodies, the proteins that make your physical appearance, all your traits. These are what we're looking at for the macromolecule. And the last one is nucleic acids. You may have heard nucleic acid before in the term deoxyribonucleic acid. That's what DNA stands for. Okay, so the monomer here is a nucleotide. Here's its structure. It's kind of a puzzle piece. You'll usually see that hexagon shape as part of it, or sometimes it's written as a pentagon. But you'll usually be able to notice one of those. It is stretched out like this, and it's kind of in a stair step shape, I guess you could say. The elements found in nucleic acids are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So now you're going to see the big P right here. Okay, so you see the phosphorus right there in the center of all those oxygens. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the first thing that you should be doing is memorizing which elements are found in which macromolecules. Okay, make you a flashcard, quiz yourself on those, because that will help you with the structures. Because once again, if you know that nucleic acids have phosphorus, then if you see a large P there, a capital P, you know right away that it's a nucleic acid. If you only see carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen and you do not see nitrogen or phosphorus, then you've now narrowed it down and you have a much better chance of getting the correct answer. So that would be the first thing that I would memorize. Okay, these are your summary questions for the notes. Yes, I want you to write them down in your notes and I want you to answer them in complete sentences. So please list these if you can fit them on the same page as previous notes. If you skip to a new page for the chart, that's fine. You can go back to the front page. I do want to see these questions answered in your notes. And please, please, please write the question down too. The answer isn't going to make any sense to you when you're studying, but if you have the question and the answer, then it'll make sense. I'm going to let you pause the video. This is the end of the notes, so once you're done writing these questions, you can go on to the next section.